Saturday, March 9th, 2024, 7:15 in the morning, and the parking lot of Henderson's Feed and Supply in rural Newton County, Iowa, was filling up with pickup trucks and coffee-drinking farmers who'd come to watch what had started as a simple disagreement and turned into something the whole community wanted to see settled. 2 weeks earlier, at this same feed store, a 67-year-old farmer named Carl Hoffman had been loading 50-pound bags of seed corn into his 1989 Ford when a younger man, maybe 28 or 30, pulled up in a brand-new Silverado with a John Deere logo decal covering the entire rear window and started talking loud enough for everyone in the lot to hear about how his new 9RX 640 was going to revolutionize his operation, how modern equipment made farming easier than it had ever been, how guys still running old iron were basically wasting time and money. The younger man's name was Tyler Marsh, and he looked more like he belonged in a gym than on a farm. 6'4" with arms that strained against his John Deere t-shirt, the kind of physique that came from lifting weights 6 days a week, not from throwing hay bales or fixing fence lines. Tyler had inherited his family's 800-acre operation 2 years ago when his father retired to Florida, and he'd immediately sold off every piece of his father's equipment and bought new, top-of-the-line John Deere machinery, financed to the hilt, but impressive as hell if you cared about looking successful. Carl had been minding his own business, loading his truck in silence the way he'd done for 40 years, but Tyler had noticed Carl's tractor parked near the barn at his farm during a drive past the week before, a 1979 Case IH 2594, and Tyler had decided this was worth commenting on. "Hey, old-timer," Tyler had called out, walking over with the confidence of someone who'd never been told to shut up. "I saw that Case sitting in your yard, red one from the 70s. You actually still farm with that thing?" Carl had looked up slowly, wiped his hands on his jeans, and nodded once without saying anything, because he'd learned decades ago that some people weren't worth the breath it took to answer them. "Man, that's rough," Tyler had continued, shaking his head like he pitied Carl. "I mean, I get it, budgets are tight for some guys, but running equipment that old, you're probably spending more on repairs than a new tractor payment would cost. Plus the inefficiency, the fuel consumption, the downtime. You'd be better off financing something modern, getting into this century." Carl had stayed quiet, but Tom Henderson, who owned the feed store and had known Carl since 1982, had stepped outside and said something that changed everything. "Tyler, that Case has been running strong for 45 years. Carl maintains it himself, doesn't break down, doesn't cost him much beyond basic upkeep, and it does everything he needs it to do. Maybe you should worry about your own operation instead of critiquing his." Tyler had laughed, the kind of laugh that carried contempt underneath. "With all respect, Tom, there's a reason nobody builds tractors like that anymore. Technology improved, equipment got better, stronger, more efficient. I could outpull that old Case with my 9RX in my sleep, probably use half the fuel doing it." That's when Carl had finally spoken, his voice quiet but clear. "You think so?" Tyler had turned, surprised the old man had said anything. "I know so. It's not even a question. My 9RX is 640 horsepower, 4-track system, probably cost more than your whole farm. No offense, but there's no comparison between modern engineering and whatever you're running." Carl had set down the seed bag he'd been holding, walked over to where Tyler was standing, and looked him in the eye. "Spring plowing starts in 2 weeks. My 240 acres against your 240. Same soil conditions, we both plant corn. Whoever finishes their acreage first wins. Your new John Deere against my old Case. If you're so confident about modern equipment, prove it." The feed store parking lot had gone dead silent, every farmer within earshot stopping what they were doing to hear this, because Carl Hoffman didn't talk much, and he definitely didn't issue challenges, but when he did, it meant something. Tyler's face had shifted through several expressions, surprise that he'd been called out, calculation about whether this was worth his time, then settling on amused acceptance. "You serious, old man? You want to race tractors like we're kids?" Carl hadn't smiled, hadn't changed expression. "I'm serious. 240 acres each, same day. Whoever finishes first wins, unless you'd rather just keep talking about how much better your equipment is without proving it." Tyler had extended his hand, grip too firm, trying to assert dominance even in a handshake. "You're on, and when I finish 3 hours before you, maybe you'll finally upgrade that museum piece you're driving." They'd shaken on it, and Tom Henderson had volunteered his farm as neutral ground, 480 acres split into 2 equal fields with identical soil composition, both fields disked and ready for planting. The competition set for Saturday, March 9th, starting at sunrise. And somehow word had spread through Newton County faster than seemed possible. Farmers talking about it at diners and co-ops and church, everyone wanting to see whether the 67-year-old running a 45-year-old Case IH could hold his own against a young bodybuilder in a brand new John Deere worth probably $500,000. The morning of March 9th brought clear skies and temperatures in the low 40s, perfect planting weather, and by 7:30 both tractors were positioned at their respective field edges with about 60 spectators gathered along the fence line. Carl's 1979 Case IH 2594 sat quiet and ready, its red paint faded in spots, but the engine clean and well maintained, a 12-row planter hitched behind it that Carl had rebuilt himself over the winter. Tyler's John Deere 9RX 640 looked like it had rolled off a showroom floor that morning, green paint gleaming, 4 rubber tracks gripping the soil, a 16-row planter behind it that cost more than most people's houses, everything about it designed to communicate power and efficiency and technological superiority. Tom Henderson stood between the 2 fields with a radio in his hand, ready to give the starting signal, and he looked at both drivers. Carl sat in his case wearing his usual work clothes, a faded denim jacket and a cap from the local co-op, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel like he was about to drive to town for groceries. Tyler sat in his John Deere cab wearing his branded t-shirt and expensive sunglasses, stretching his arms like he was warming up for a workout, playing to the crowd that had gathered. At exactly 7:45, Tom's voice came through the radio. "Gentlemen, you can start whenever you're ready." Tyler fired up his 9RX immediately, the engine roaring to life with 640 horsepower of diesel power, the sound impressive and intimidating, and he throttled forward without hesitation, the big machine moving fast across the field, planter dropping seed with computer-guided precision. Carl started his case 5 seconds later, the older engine catching with a different sound, rougher but steady, and he eased into motion without rushing, finding his rhythm, the 12-row planter working behind him in a pattern he'd run 1,000 times before. The contrast was immediate and obvious. Tyler's John Deere moved faster, covered more ground per pass because of the wider planter, the GPS guidance system keeping his rows perfectly straight without effort, and for the first hour it looked like the competition would be exactly what Tyler had predicted, modern equipment dominating old iron through sheer technological advantage. By 9 o'clock, Tyler had completed about a third of his 240 acres, while Carl had finished maybe a quarter of his, and some of the spectators started drifting away, convinced they'd seen enough to know how this would end. But Tom Henderson stayed, and so did about 20 other farmers who'd worked long enough to know that farming wasn't just about speed, and they kept watching. At 9:47, Tyler's 9RX came to an abrupt stop in the middle of a pass, and those who were watching saw him climb down from the cab and walk around to the planter, clearly troubleshooting something. The computer system that controlled seed depth and spacing had thrown an error code, a sensor malfunction that Tyler couldn't diagnose without the diagnostic laptop he'd left in his truck, and by the time he'd walked back to get it, booted up the software and run through the troubleshooting protocol, he'd lost 22 minutes.
He got the system reset and continued, but the stop had cost him his early lead, and Carl had kept working at his steady pace, not gaining ground fast but not stopping either. By 11:30 they were roughly even, both about halfway through their fields, and Tyler pushed his machine harder, throttling up to make up time, the big 9RX eating up ground at an impressive rate. Then at 12:15 the John Deere stopped again, this time with a hydraulic leak in one of the planter's lift cylinders, fluid spraying from a failed seal that would need to be replaced before he could continue, and Tyler's face went red as he radioed Tom Henderson asking if he could get a replacement part brought out. Tom consulted the rules they'd agreed on, which said each driver had to work with what they brought, no outside assistance beyond what they could provide themselves, and Tyler had to make a choice, either fix the hydraulic leak with the tools and parts he had in his truck, or quit. He spent 40 minutes lying under the planter in the dirt, replacing the seal with a spare he found in his toolbox, getting hydraulic fluid all over his John Deere shirt, and when he finally got the system working again and climbed back into the cab, Carl was 3/4 done with his field, still running at that same steady pace, the old case never faltering. Tyler finished his repairs and pushed the 9RX hard, running faster than was probably safe, trying to make up lost time. But at 1:30, the planter's computer system threw another error, this time a calibration issue with the seed metering, and Tyler had to stop again to recalibrate, another 15 minutes gone. Carl crossed his final pass at 2:43 in the afternoon, shut down the case, and climbed out to inspect his work while Tyler was still running his last 20 acres, the young farmer's face tight with frustration and disbelief as he watched the old man finish first. Tyler finished his field at 3:18, a full 35 minutes after Carl, and when he shut down the 9RX and climbed out, his expensive sunglasses were gone and his John Deere shirt was stained with hydraulic fluid and dirt. The spectators who'd stayed to watch the finish were quiet, not gloating, but thoughtful, and Carl walked over to where Tyler was standing and extended his hand. Tyler looked at it for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say, then shook it without meeting Carl's eyes. Tom Henderson walked over with a clipboard showing the official times, Carl finishing in 6 hours and 58 minutes, Tyler in 7 hours and 33 minutes, and he announced the results to the group that had gathered. Carl Hoffman wins by 35 minutes, running a 1979 Case IH against a 2024 John Deere 9RX. Someone in the crowd started clapping, then others joined, and Carl nodded his thanks but didn't celebrate, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking tired. Tyler stayed silent, staring at his tractor like it had personally betrayed him, and finally one of the older farmers, a man named Dutch Richards who'd been farming since the 1960s, spoke up. "Tyler, you want to know why you lost?" Tyler's voice was tight. "Equipment failure, bad luck, sensor problems I couldn't predict." Dutch shook his head. "You lost because you don't understand your machine, and Carl understands his. Your John Deere is more advanced, more powerful, more capable in every technical measure, but when it broke down, you couldn't fix it without computers and diagnostic tools, and even then it took you 3 stops to get through a simple planting job. Carl's case is older and simpler, but he built that planter himself. He knows every bolt and bearing. When something needs adjusting, he feels it before the machine tells him. He's been running that tractor for so long, it's like an extension of himself. You're running equipment you bought 3 months ago that you barely know how to operate beyond the basics." Tyler's face flushed red. "I know how to operate my equipment." "You know how to drive it when it's working," Dutch corrected. "But you don't know how to keep it working. And in farming, that's the difference between getting the job done and losing a day to repairs. Modern equipment is incredible when it runs right, but it's complicated, fragile in ways old iron never was, and if you don't have the knowledge to maintain it and fix it, all that technology just gives you more ways to fail." Carl finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Tyler, your 9RX is a better tractor than my Case by every objective measure. More power, better fuel economy, more precision. I'm not arguing that, but you pushed it too hard trying to win a race instead of just doing the work. You ran it faster than conditions allowed, stressed the systems, didn't check your hydraulics before you started, didn't verify your calibrations, treated it like a machine that would handle anything because it was new and expensive. I ran my Case the same speed I always run it, checked everything before I started, listened to the engine, watched for problems, and when the work was done, it was done. No breakdowns, no stops, just steady progress." The words landed hard because they were true, and everyone watching knew it. Tyler looked at Carl, then at the Case sitting quiet in the completed field, then back at his own 9RX with its computer screens and technology and $500,000 price tag. "I thought newer meant better," Tyler said quietly, and it wasn't defiant anymore, just confused. "Newer means different," Carl said. "Sometimes better, sometimes just more complicated. The best equipment is whatever you understand well enough to keep running. For me, that's a 45-year-old Case I rebuilt myself. For someone else, it might be a brand new John Deere. But either way, you need to know your machine, respect it, maintain it, not just buy it and assume the technology will handle everything." Tom Henderson cleared his throat. "Tyler, for what it's worth, you're a strong farmer, and your operation will be successful if you learn from this.
Nobody here is saying you're not capable. We're saying you got humbled today, and that's a good thing. Happens to everyone eventually. Tyler nodded slowly, looking at Carl. You willing to teach me how to actually maintain equipment, understand what I'm running? Carl smiled for the first time that day. Come by my shop Monday morning, bring your service manual. We'll go through your 9RX together, and I'll show you what to check and how to listen to what the machine is telling you. Deal? They shook hands again, and this time Tyler's grip wasn't trying to prove anything. 3 months later, Tyler's John Deere 9RX was running better than it ever had, not because the machine had changed, but because Tyler had learned to maintain it properly, spending 2 mornings a week at Carl's shop, going through systems and repairs and the kind of practical knowledge that doesn't come from manuals. The 2 men became unlikely friends, the 67-year-old farmer and the 28-year-old bodybuilder, sharing coffee and comparing notes on their operations. And when Tyler finally paid off enough of his equipment debt to breathe easier, he drove out to Carl's farm to say thank you. Carl was in his shop rebuilding a carburetor on the old case, and he looked up when Tyler walked in. That race was the best thing that ever happened to me, Tyler said. Taught me I didn't know as much as I thought I did. Carl set down his wrench and smiled. Happens to all of us eventually. The smart ones learn from it instead of making excuses. They worked together that afternoon, the old case sitting between them, and Tyler understood finally that the competition had never been about which tractor was better. It had been about which farmer understood that knowledge and humility matter more than horsepower, and that sometimes the most valuable equipment you own isn't the newest or most expensive, it's the one you know well enough to trust.